Hi everybody, welcome to video 3.5, I guess 3.2, since we're still in the same accessing elements in array article. And today I'm solely just going to go over for loops. I don't think this was the most intuitive to put writing items into an array with a loop and reading items from an array with a loop from this standpoint. But it's all good. Hopefully this video will clarify for it. And it's also the first video where I'm actually going to be coding. So writing items into an array with a loop. So let's just say, for example, you have an array of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you want to replace that with 6, 7, 8, 9. So this is the syntax of a for loop. The first part is basically the instantiation, right? You can think of it also as a pointer. Let's say like, I equals 0, the index is 0. So begin at 0, right? And then when does it end? When I reaches the end of array. So if let I equals 0, let I start here. And then if I is still less than array.length, so this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And once it's done, if the index is still less than array.length, which is 5, execute this code. And after executing the code, I want you to increment I by 1. So once it's done, I doesn't become 0, I becomes 1, right? So basically, you instantiate it, I equals to 0, and continue executing the code if I is less than array.length, I is less than 5. So execute this code, and after the execution is done, you increment I. And it'll continually increment until this reaches this, until I reaches this number. So I could do like 100. Print hello. So this will print hello 100 times. Because 0, and then if it's 0 is less than 100, execute. And then execute this, I becomes 1. 1 is less than 100, execute this. 1, I becomes 2, 2, etc. All the way to 100. So I could just do r.length because r.length is a property of array and it gives me the length of 5. So let's see what happens if I run this. It'll probably print 5 times. Oh, it's because there's no such thing as print. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So that is the basics of a loop, right? Let I equal 0 is instantiation. I is less than r.length is, I don't know, rule to execute. And then I++ equals to what happens after code gets executed. So you can actually get pretty creative with this, right? You can instantiate this let I equals 0. Let's do like let I equals 3. What'll happen then, you think? It'll only print 2 times, I think. Yeah, 1, 2, because it starts at 3. So this is the instantiation. You could have I equals 4, I equals -5, -100, but the most basic one is I equals 0. So that's the instantiation. So r.length, this is basically the rule to determine whether or not to execute. It's so wordy, but I think it's okay. So this is basically the rule to determine whether or not this code inside of these brackets should execute, right? If I did let I equals to like 6, 6 is not greater than r.length. This rule is going to check. It's similar to like an if statement. And it'll say, okay, I won't execute this code because this is false. So if I run this, I won't get anything. See? So think of this as your conditional. Instantiation, conditional, and then after execution. Okay. You could also do something like this. I plus equals 2. So instead of just incrementing 0 to 1, I want you to go to 0 to 2 to 4 to 6 to 8, etc. You could do that. You could do 3, and you could do a ton of other things. But the most common one is I++. So that is the basics of a for loop, right? So within this for loop, now a matter of writing items and reading items shouldn't be too complex, right? Let's just say I want to read console.log ri. And this syntax is something that you're going to use often, but just think of this as like, okay, array, and then the index. And that index is going to be I. So it's just going to print out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Boom. And that's reading, basically. So this entire portion here is just this. But the most important part is not to understand like the code, but to understand like, okay, what are we doing here? Like this stuff here, I want you to understand this conceptually, like in your brain. So if you understand this, you can use for loops and get creative as much as you can. It's a pretty basic concept, but I believe for somebody that has never seen a for loop in their lives, it takes a while to grasp it. But if you can just remember that in a for loop, there's basically 4 components of it. There's the instantiation part, there's the conditional, there's the what happens after the execution, and there's the code itself. If you understand those 4 things in a for loop, you should be good to go, right? So what about like writing stuff, right? Well, if I wanted to write something, I could just do I times 2. Let's actually see what happens there. So what I'm saying is like, okay, array index, grab whatever value this is, array I, if it's array 0, it's going to be 1. I want you to set array at index 0 to be I times 2, which is going to be 2. So hopefully after this executes, it's going to be 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Or 0, 2, 4, 6, 8. Okay, that's because I is 0. So if I did like this, I would get what I want. And that's because, oh, wow, okay, that's terrible. So this is a good thing, right? Like I basically failed, right? Like as a beginner, I would be freaking terrified. I'd be like, holy crap, like what did I do wrong? But don't worry, like this debugging part of it, I wish that JavaScript like made this a bit like more straightforward, but all it's saying is that like, hey, allocation failed. If that's all they said, I think I would be less intimidated. But the fact that like this stack trace is like all of this gibberish, it makes me feel like I did something like really, really bad, but like not really. So anytime you deal with this, like don't worry about it. Like take a step back, you know, breathe, and then just be like, okay, let me try again. And I think what happened was, I think I need to do this. Plus 1. There we go, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. And honestly, what just happened, that happens like all the time. So I basically just rewrote it, and then reading it was basically like this. So read. Right. So I honestly feel like this is pretty repetitive, but I just want to hammer the concept that sometimes when things are written very, very like, I don't know, politically correct, and it's just like, oh yeah, like this makes so much sense, it's not necessarily always the most intuitive way of understanding. And I think that's pretty key. The way I approach certain things is like, number one, okay, what's the most practical and common sense thing that I'm trying to do, or what they're trying to teach me to do, or whatever article. What's the most practical and most common sense thing? Oh, they're basically just trying to teach you how to do a simple for loop, and they're teaching you how to do a write and read, right? But because it's written in this way where it's like writing and reading, it's confusing because you think that because the way it's written, you learn about writing items into an array here and then reading items into an array here. So you just thought that that same way of thinking should be applied to how you learn these two. But that's not technically the case, because like if you don't know what a for loop is, this is going to be like pretty confusing for you. And yeah, that's just not a good feeling. So just to recap, a for loop is these four things. Right? It's the instantiation, the conditional, what happens after the code execution, and the code itself, what it is that you want to run inside of here. If you could understand those four pillars of a for loop, you will never, ever, ever question or like be confused of what a for loop is like ever again. And this is just how to read and write it. But you could do any type of other types of code inside of here. And I think that is all. And here, what they're basically saying is that there's like fancy syntax of how to write a for loop in Java that's easier than this. It's just basically a simpler version. Like in JavaScript, you could do like r.forEach, and then it's a function, and then you could do like num. And then this syntax would be the same thing as I did here. Don't worry too much about it. It's one of those things where if you understand the for loop pretty well, you could just Google like short syntax for loops in JavaScript, and you should find that right away. But like understanding like what is this dot, what is this for each, what is this arrow, that's not really worth delving into, because it's one of those things. It's like once you understand what it does, it just like makes complete sense.